Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another episode review for Dark Side of the Ring. And in this episode, it talks about the controversial slap shown on television from wrestler David Schultz. I'll go over the episode first and explain my thoughts at the end. Before I talk about the infamous slap, I want to talk about David's background first. In the 70s, David watched wrestling on TV and thought that it did not look so hard, as he decided to pursue a career in it. He went to Herb Welch, who was a wrestler during the time of the Great Depression, and also learned from wrestlers who were in carnivals. Herb eventually trained David, as Herb was living in Dyersburg and had a farm where he would train his trainees and beat them up. Supposedly, Herb would go to the locker room to take a dump and rub his crap in his armpits. Then Herb would get a guy into a headlock with the nasty stuff still in his arms until the guy screamed, begging for mercy. In the beginning of David's training, Herb thought that David was stiff. Eventually, David learned that being a wrestler, you have to learn how to work. Schultz would take on a tough hillbilly kind of gimmick once he started his wrestling career. In the 70s, Schultz crossed paths with up-and-coming wrestler at the time, Hulk Hogan, who had just started out in Georgia. Hulk lived in a van, but David was generous enough to let Hogan share his apartment, and the two would become close friends. Once the 80s hit, Hogan would become a big star as he went to the WWF. Schultz soon followed Hogan to WWF, and as he began wrestling there, he also began a rivalry with Hogan. As a heel, Schultz was a wild and crazy character, yet because of this, he became a rising star during the 80s. On TNT, during a promo, David fired some rifles in what looks to be a small room, as a scared young Vince McMahon freaked out. David became so into his character that Child Protective Services came into his house one day because they saw a promo where David was abusive to his wife and kids. It turns out that the wife and kids in the television program were not his, as David explained while being interviewed for this episode. He stayed into his character even outside of wrestling, which is known as kayfabe, where a wrestler portrays staged events within the industry as real and authentic as they could. Let's focus on John, the guy who was slapped by David, for a little bit. John Stossel was a reporter for 2020, a show that aired on ABC, and was also a rising journalist. He wanted to do a take on WWF, as John thought that wrestling was fake and that the industry was lying to their audience. In the wrestling business, no matter which promotion, they cannot reveal or get out of character, as they think that it might tarnish the storylines, and so the wrestlers must stay in kayfabe. For his job, Stossel did a survey to see if the wrestling fans thought that wrestling was real, and the majority of the people who did the survey said that it was to them. It bothered John, as he did not like how the wrestling fans were being lied to by the wrestling business. Fortunately for John, he interviewed a wrestler named Eddie Mansfield, who was known as the Continental Lover in wrestling, as John got an inside scoop of what the wrestling business is really like in Eddie's point of view. Eddie did not like how WWF did not give health insurance, as other athletes from different sports were able to get health insurance. In the episode, Eddie said that he was mad at a booker for taking some of his money, as his checks were cut by a percentage. He said that he was going to expose the wrestling business, and that's where he went to ABC and John in order to expose and tell his side of the story. Eddie showed Stossel the wrestling tricks on how not to get hurt on the 2020 episode. Schultz was not happy that Stossel did not ask him to show him how it's done in the ring. Mansfield also showed blades that the wrestlers would keep hidden in their bandages so that they could make themselves bleed, as seen on television. Stossel said in the interview that he was shocked, as the wrestlers seemed dedicated to doing the blade cutting as part of their wrestling career. In the episode, Mansfield called out the promoters and how there is no health insurance to help them. As part of the 2020 special, John went to Madison Square Garden in order to see if Eddie's allegations were true. Jim Cornette and David said in the episode that they do not believe that Eddie did it for the boys, as he said so in this episode. While John was interviewing backstage, David said that he was told by Vince McMahon to stay in character and to go to Stossel. John Stossel's first interview was with the Iron Sheik. He thought that David was scary as he approached Stossel and asked David why he was called Dr. D. John said that he did not feel comfortable around David, as he wanted to ask him the important question, which was to know if wrestling was fake. But he eventually did seconds later. David started to get upset by the question, as he told him why he would ask a question like that, and then slapped John. Stossel then goes to the ground as he got slapped in the ear and was able to get back up. Once he got back up, John got hit in the other ear and fell to the ground again. Cornette thinks that David did not hit Stossel that bad. John said that at the moment of the slap, he felt very scared and angry as he tried to crawl away from David. Eddie said that he had told John not to ask any questions, and if he tried to, John would have gotten slapped, which ended up happening though. David said in the interview that he felt that his slap was like a mother slapping their child if the child was doing something wrong. Vince had supposedly told David that John was going to press charges and to go to the hotel where Stossel was. 8 weeks after the slap incident, John aired his report on the 2020 show. The wrestling business was in a panic once that episode aired. Jim said that the 2020 episode looked as if they were ruining a lot of the wrestlers' jobs and employees within the wrestling industry. Eddie said that he received death threats and had to move to New York. Even though he was blacklisted from wrestling, Eddie said that he was fine with it and never wanted to go back there. Vince had hoped that the chaos would calm down as he had David go and stay in Japan. While David was in Japan, Vince wanted him to hit another reporter in order for the John slap to stop being talked about, but David said that he refused it at first. He wanted it to be a storyline, so Vince agreed and had David slap the reporter in Japan. As for John, he said that after the slap, he felt ringing in his ears as well as pain. Stossel then sued David for damages. David's lawyer told David to take care of the situation with Stossel because they had told David that Vince was probably not going to take care of it. John then decided to sue Vince as well. David went to Vince's office to sign a paper, but once he arrived, Vince wanted David to sign the paper that says it was all David's fault. He refused and told Vince that he would only sign the paper if it said that Vince told David to slap John. Days after the slap and feeling pain in his ear, John went to a highfalutin doctor, but the doctor did not perform a checkup on John. The doctor had told John that he was suffering because John was in pain and stressed out from the lawsuit. He was not happy with the doctor's words as the doctor did not check John nor his ear, so John told the doctor, "Screw you." The lawsuit was settled years later at $280,000, and John said that once he got the money, his ear pain went away. Very strange. Vince had moved on and focused on his new project at the time, which was WrestleMania. However, David was not in the match card. David thought that Mr. T wrestling Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania was a bad idea because Mr. T was not a wrestler. Jim said that David seemed to be resentful towards Mr. T, but David said that he never had a confrontation with Mr. T. David said that Mr. T talked to him in the hallway, and an agent named Jay fired David. He wanted to watch the Tanaka match, and as David tried to, the agent sent security and had told them that David was a dangerous guy who was going to hurt someone. The cops handcuffed David, had guns pointed to him, and threw him out the door. Once David went to Connecticut, he called Vince and was trying to check on the situation with the agent. But David said that Vince told him that he was not going to work for WWF anymore. Months later, after the 2020 expose, Hulk was in the Richard Belzer show and demonstrated a wrestling move to Richard, but it caused Richard to fall to the ground cold. Mr. T was also in the show, and while he and Hulk were on the show, Richard got his head busted. David said that Hogan did not get nothing out of it, or got fired, as David sounded upset when talking about Hogan's stunts on the talk show. Jim said that there was a settlement of $5 million so that Hogan would not get fired since he was a big star during the 80s. He felt that his friendship with Hulk was great until they went to WWF. When they were friends, David said that Hogan hated it when he called Hulk a big head. After getting fired from WWF, David tried to find work but felt that he was blackballed by the wrestling promoters as they seemed to not want to give him work in wrestling. David then found work as a bounty hunter, and it seemed like a great fit for him as he sounded enthusiastic about it in the episode. He eventually became one of the greatest bounty hunters in America and was given lots of work. One of the most memorable experiences David said he had while working as a bounty hunter was when he was helping these two girls who were 14 and 15 years old at the time and were kidnapped. Supposedly the FBI could not find the kidnapper, and the kidnapper had the two girls chained in a commode. David found the kidnapper in Puerto Rico as the two girls were stripping at a club. He caught the kidnapper and saved the girls, a baby that belonged to one of the girls, and 2 Doberman dogs. Years after the slap, Vince eventually told the world that wrestling was entertainment, not a sport. In 2019, Hulk came forward with a different recollection of the Mr. T incident. On the Steve Austin show, Hogan said that David had given Mr. T a giant slap and that Vince was very mad about it. David said in the episode that if he were to interact with John again, he would not slap him. John, on the other hand, said that if he were to see David again, he would tell him F you. In the episode, John said that the slap was his most watched video on YouTube for the 2020 channel. He also said that people would approach him and ask if he was the guy that got slapped. However, Eddie thought that David was an okay person. Jim Cornette calls Eddie a has-been and never was, who did not have the talent, which is why he never got over in wrestling. Since the airing of this episode, David has lived in Tennessee. He has a storage unit of stuff from his wrestling days. Interviewers for this episode are Jim Cornette, David Schultz, John Stossel, journalist, and Eddie Mansfield, Continental lover. I give this episode an 8 out of 10 as it gave a deep dive into the slap, but it did feel a little bit rushed. I sort of feel bad for David as he got the short end of the stick as Hulk got away with hurting a person on television. Looking at the clips in this episode, David had a lot of potential, but I think it worked out in the end as he became a bounty hunter that people depended on. He was able to save these kidnapped girls from another country, which I don't think it was necessary to do it, but he did it anyway. Being in kayfabe for a wrestler, though, must be complicated, as it seems to lead into some trouble along the way, just as David did with John Stossel. David should have kept it calm, but in a situation with the media, you do not want to make a fool of yourself in front of millions of people. I'm not going to lie, but Hulk Hogan is a bad friend. When I did the Brutus Beefcake video, Hulk and Brutus seemed close until Hulk cut him off. Then there is the Jesse Ventura incident where Hulk got Jesse fired. An important lesson in this episode: do not be friends with Hulk, and never slap people, especially a reporter. I also think that Vince had some responsibility in the slap incident. David's story in the incident seems believable, but only he and John know what went down. I do think that Vince should have some fault, but what David did was way out of line. As for John, he seemed to come off as negative and probably still has a grudge as of today. His attitude seems aggressive as he told the doctor to screw off and that he would tell David F you if he were to see him again. I get that he feels embarrassed by it, but John seems to hold a grudge about it since this episode had aired. It is weird when he said that once he got the money, his ear pain was gone. Seems really sketchy, but I had something like that happen to me a long time ago. I had a toothache that went on for days, and I did not want to go to the dentist. I eventually did, and once I stepped into the dentist's office, my toothache was gone. John just did not sit well with me, as he seemed immature throughout the episode. As for Eddie, I think he wanted some attention, but he was right that wrestlers should get health insurance or some sort of thing to help them with their health, as wrestling is a job for them. Even though wrestling is scripted, I do think that wrestlers get injured accidentally and put their bodies through a lot, whether it's a cage, chair, or a table. Storylines are words, but any movement in wrestling can cause an injury if not done right. Some facts about David Schultz was that he wrestled in New Japan Pro Wrestling after getting fired from WWF. He then returned to Stampede Wrestling and made other appearances in Lutte International, North American Wrestling Association, Central States Wrestling, and Tri-State Wrestling Alliance. David retired from wrestling in 1989. When he moved to Connecticut, David opened a bail bonds office and started his career in bounty hunting. Interesting fact, Schultz was accused by the WWF of conspiring with former WWF referee Rita Chatterton to extort or obtain by force of $5 million from the company. Rita was one of the first female referees in WWF and accused Vince McMahon of R-wording her. The lawsuit was left abandoned as Vince was indicted for allegedly illegally distributing anabolic steroids. Schultz testified against McMahon in the steroid trial. McMahon would be acquitted of all charges that were against him. David has a book called Don't Call Me Fake, which was released in 2018. He was honored in the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2006. David was born on June 1st, 1955. He was born in Madison County, Tennessee. John Stossel was born on March 6, 1947 in Chicago Heights, Illinois, and seems to focus more on politics as of now. In 2016, Stossel announced that he has lung cancer even though he never smoked. One of his lungs was surgically removed, and he is still with us as of today. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching this video and for over 500 subscribers so far. You guys are awesome, and I could not do this without you. Let me know what you think in the comment section if you would like to share. Comment, like, or subscribe if you want, and until next time, take care of your mental health and everyone around you, and I'll do the same too. Bye guys.